Hi, this is Paul. I loved this video that Kale Zeldin made with his mom. It was outstanding. I told my mom to watch it, and she did. Because I just finished making the Bonhoeffer End of the Age of Hitler, Strong Gods, Rusty Reno, CRC, Banner video. And I knew I had to make that video before I made this video. Because, well, let's go back to that article. So in that video, I talked about the papacy during the Second World War, Pius XI, Pius XII. Of course, the Second World War sets up Vatican II. There's no question that in some ways, the Catholic Church, so I'm told, I don't really know any of this history, but I'm told at the end of the First World War, Islam almost collapses because Islam had sort of been centered in the caliphate in what today is Turkey and the Ottoman Empire, and after the First World War, the whole thing collapses. And it sort of gets reconstituted in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, that particular brand of Islam, then becomes sort of the virulent brand of Islam that we have today that goes out into the world. Well, one might argue that in some ways, Roman Catholicism nearly collapses in the Second World War. Before the Second World War, well, first of all, the Catholic Church is never just the papacy. And as I try to get my mind around this church, this insanely old, large, complex thing that is the Roman Catholic Church, I try to understand it. Now, again, if you watched the new naming of the new pope, you would think that the church rises and falls on the papacy, but of course it doesn't. It's much more spread out from that. Now, for those of you who don't know, first things, Rusty Reno is Roman Catholic. And First Things get started as a Lutheran pastor goes back to the Catholic Church. So this is in some ways one of the premier journals of religious thought and culture in America. And again, it's Roman Catholic, as Aaron Wren will note. Where's the main line? The main line has collapsed, and in many ways, the Roman Catholics are trying to take their place. And so none of this is anti-Catholic, but it's honest debate about the church. So he points out that Western culture didn't switch out a Christian moral system for an anti-Nazi one without good reason. Christianity's moral authority had been decaying for centuries. The Protestant Reformation, all those reformations, are built on anti-clericalism, built on the corruption that is in the church. People are not finding the church compelling. Leaders aren't, but there are masses and masses of people that do, and they live their Catholic lives, and all of that is integrated into European culture, but in all these different cultures in Europe in different ways. The Roman Catholic Church, in the Counter-Reformation, in some ways adopted a degree of modernity and uniformity in order to push back against the inroads, that rebellion, all these Protestant churches popping up, that they were making into the culture. And of course, in the Holy Roman Empire, you're going to have the 30 Years' War. It's a mess. Two of the areas in which, so you've got some main Catholic areas in Europe. Of course, England had their own Reformation and is ostensibly Protestant, but they're always trying to straddle the Protestant Catholic thing, and they're fighting about it. You've got Spain, critically important Catholic empire, which of course discovers the Americas, spreads Catholicism through the Americas with the exception of the British colonies that are English separatists, like nonconformists, like Puritans and Pilgrims, and others that just want to get over there and make some money. You've got the Habsburgs, who are a Roman Catholic dynasty of tremendous power and success right there in the middle of Europe. Okay, Austria. Now Hungary has a bit of a reformation. You have the Hussites, but the Holy Roman Empire and Italy come into the 19th century Well, Napoleon's going to put an end to the Holy Roman Empire, and Germany is going to form. And Italy finds itself in a real mess. Now, part of what's important to think about Italy is partly because, I think for many of us, because of their performance in the Second World War, Italy sort of gets a reputation as being a backwater, but it isn't. For many years in medieval Europe, Italy was one of the wealthiest, most important places in Europe. The Holy Roman Empire and Germany and the Netherlands, these were backwater. France, of course, had its own power. Spain eventually would rise. But Italy was this giant dock into the Mediterranean, and even after the fall of the empire, the Mediterranean was the world superhighway. And the great empire of the East, the Roman Empire, often we call the Byzantines, they were there. So, of course, Venice, Ravenna, they were on that coast because that's how they could keep contact with the power of the empire. So Italy, of course, has the Renaissance, tremendously wealthy, tremendously important. But as you get into the 19th century, Italy was continually beset by Austria coming down, by France coming in, by Spain taking pieces. Everyone was taking a piece of Italy, and Italy figured the only way they could sort of level up and maintain some standing in Europe would be if they would unify. And eventually, nationalism, Italy unifies, but that comes at the direct expense of the Catholic Church. And one might argue that the creation of the Catholic Church as a denomination, they weren't a denomination before, but the first turn to them being a denomination is the unification of Italy and basically the imprisonment of the Pope in the Vatican. That's where the 20th century begins. And the Pope has just lost so much in Europe. The Papal States are gone. Influence is gone. And they act, again, if you watched, they act like a little monarchy, a little fiefdom. And they all have all those trappings of monarchy. And all of that is going on. And they have a State Department, basically. And they have ambassadors to all these states. Not to the United States. The United States sort of has a weird special relationship to the Vatican. The Vatican's important because there's so much Catholic immigration that has come into the United States. The Irish, the Italians, French, other Catholic groups in the United States. So it's important, but the Catholic See democracy as part of that whole Protestant rebellion. Democracy isn't godly. God speaks through the king and the emperor, and the Pope is kind of the king emperor, and down to the people. There's a hierarchy. All that hierarchy is there. And, of course, then when you get the rise of the fascist states, like Spain, see, part of the difficulty was, so you can go to Vatican I, and you can look at Ultramontanism. Part of what they're doing then in the 19th century is they're trying to level up the Pope. Because the Pope is really having difficulty with emperors and kings. And the popes had been wrestling with emperors and kings all throughout the medieval period. But now, ironically, in the modern period, you get these tremendously powerful monarchs. And you wouldn't think like monarchy and modernity. Yes, you have these tremendously powerful monarchs and these dynastic families. You've got the Habsburgs, and the Habsburgs are loyal Catholics, but the church is often an instrument of state in many of these countries. And they're treated like an instrument of state. And so when you have the rise of Franco and then Mussolini, these two early fascists, they work the church-state thing, and basically the Vatican has been negotiating with emperors and kings, and emperors are sort of strong men that level up, and as are kings often. They've been negotiating with these guys forever. So they negotiate with Mussolini, and they negotiate with Franco, and church and state become this tight bond of two institutions trying to bring the country in the same direction, to the degree that the interest of the king or the dictator and the interest of the church sort of coincide. But of course, the rise of the British Empire and the French Revolution, well, these are terrible things for the church. So the modern age's keenest moral test, and a test of the Christian churches, failed dismally, not just because so many of them openly collaborated or consented with Nazism, fascism, and nationalism. Of course they did. They had always collaborated with these nations. And again, you get to the United States. Now, a lot of people don't remember this. The United States is a union of states, and these states could have their own official religion. For example, the Pilgrims and the Puritans reigned in Massachusetts. That was their state religion. But the United States, as sort of a confederation, didn't have an official state church. And they couldn't, because you had religious diversity within the colonies and later within the states. So eventually Massachusetts gave up its state church, and you had this secular state in the United States. But it was deeply Christian. It was WASP run, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Not only just because many of them openly collaborated with or consented to Nazi fascism and nationalism, nearly as bad was the slowness of the non-collaborating churches to wake up to what was going on. The most glaring sin was the church's ancient complicity in anti-Semitism, but it was only the centerpiece of a wider tableau of moral failings which the war had mercilessly exposed. And so if you read those books on the papacy during the war, boy, they've got to be quick on their feet, because they're right there in Italy. And, when the Germans invaded Italy, well, they saw what the Germans did to the church. And would Hitler leave the Vatican alone? I mean, again, I know those books are controversial, but books have a lot in them. So, but of course, the Protestant churches in Germany, along with the Catholic churches, the Protestant churches, which were much closer to having state power than Catholicism in Germany. But remember, Germany's a fairly new thing, and culture war, that was Bismarck's attempt to sort of push the church down and push the church away. So there's a lot going on, and then, of course, the Western powers are going to frame this as Christianity, and it's going to be Protestant Christianity. But increasingly in the United States, the Jews and the Catholics and eventually the African Americans would sort of be led into the big tent. Now, but there's lots of regular people out there, and they're regular Catholics, and the traditions of the Catholic Church are going on as usual. There's an entire worldview, a religion that they're delivering, and they're delivering it through the liturgy, and they're delivering it through the Mass, and they're delivering it through the fasting, and they're delivering it through all of this. And so what I love about this is that, we're looking at these geopolitical religious things, and Cale zooms down, and Cale did this with me. He said, the changes that my mom went through in her lifetime, wow.
All right, so
change settings.
Socially speaking, you talk about this kind of optimism as a young Catholic. Mm-hmm. You've got a brand new Catholic president. And so your sense of the council was you sound to me like it was very hopeful and optimistic.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so what kind of news are you getting then as the council progresses? The council meets in 63, it meets again in 64, and then it completes its work in 65. So what kind of
right. We started getting, that there would be changes in the liturgy, that it would be translated into the vernacular. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of other liberalizing tendencies. Yeah. For example, and before Vatican II, the fast to go to communion, the Eucharist, from midnight was reduced to 3 hours.
It's 3 hours.
3 hours.
So now, of course, it's 1. But
and then there's this further liberalizing of 1.
Okay.
Now she's using the word liberalizing, and again, I usually sort of set up rigor and liberation. And what's been so interesting, again, in the Friday live streams that we've had, this younger generation is coming on, and in the Orthodox moment, it's like, we want rigor. We want people to tell us what to do. We want structure. We had a wonderful conversation in our Sunday estuary meeting where one woman who has never seen a single one of my videos, I promise you. Again, another woman, that African American woman, now in her 80s, grew up in the Jim Crow South. Best storytellers. She's telling just these amazing stories in our group, and the group is just eating them up with a spoon. But again, talking about the rigor, that community in the Jim Crow South, that African American community, they needed rigor, they needed discipline. Part of the reason that you see the kind of discipline demonstrated in the civil rights movement, the nonviolent civil rights movement coming out of the churches, is that these people had developed rigor and discipline because they had to. It was a survival strategy. And so they had rigor and discipline on many levels. And you have this, of course, in other kinds of churches. And remember, Catholicism, America was a deeply anti-Catholic place for a long time for a lot of political reasons. And by the time John F. Kennedy gets elected to the presidency in 1960, that's a sea change in terms of what really had been building up in the previous 2 decades. The attempt to purposely include Roman Catholics in polite elite society in America. But this rigor, that was in the church. You learned that rigor in the church. So you fasted, you abided by this. And of course, there's a whole worldview and an imaginary around it. Now you see, okay, you're going from like midnight to mass. I used to always wonder, why Sunday morning? Well, Easter-ish. So many things in the Christian Reformed Church I look at and I think, these are sort of echoes of the Roman Catholic Church. Church visitation. Christian Reformed Church didn't have communion much, and church visitation was timed so that basically it was the Christian Reformed version of confession before you would take communion. And when you look at the old forms in the Christian Reformed Church of the communion forms, the purpose was you want to be sinless before you take communion, because if you take the communion in a state where you're not sufficiently sinless, you will eat and drink judgment upon yourself. So you've got this biblical code running underneath, but it gets manifest in these different traditions. And again, these traditions are enforced by these communities. If you violated these traditions, it was serious.
So, practically speaking, that meant, as a kid, you would have gone to bed on Saturday night. Right. You woke up, got dressed.
Did not drink water.
In your Sunday finest, so no water, no food.
Right.
So you show up. I would imagine the masses probably were earlier then.
Okay, they had to be.
Yeah, right.
Nobody went to communion at noon.
Right.
I remember there was one woman who went to communion at noon, and it was like,
how did she do it?
Right. It was not unusual for somebody to sit.
She's a saint. She's rigorous. She really knows how to fast. The rest of us putzes are all sitting there, get to church as early as possible because I'm thirsty. Now, again, there are various forms of things like this in the Christian Reformed Church, but when I watched this video, some of the things that really struck me were the theological differences between the Reformed, our, saved by grace, not by works. Even though the Christian Reformed Church had some rigor and more works, at least for me growing up, there was always a sense that you're not finally saved by your observances. You're saved by grace. And again, if you listen to my sermons, misery, deliverance, gratitude, the gratitude we do is a gift of appreciation to God, not something that's necessarily motivated out of fear. Although I would have to say in many Christian Reformed places, fear was a big motivator to keep you from sinning. Exodus 20.
Through the entire Mass, reverently, but not to go to communion.
Because they had broken the fast. Right. So the fast then was specifically to take the Eucharist.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And of course, we went from, during Lent, fasting, where you had the 2 small meatless meals, and then a normal meal every day of Lent.
Okay.
Friday, of course, meatless all day.
Yeah.
And I did that for 2 years.
And again, it was funny because I grew up in New Jersey. There were a lot of Catholics around, and the deli down. So I worked in a strip mall. A strip. I remember saying strip mall in Europe, and people looked at me. A strip mall is basically a strip of stores next to the road. It has nothing to do with strip clubs. That's a very different thing. Just want to not fool any of our European audience here. But I worked in a bakery in a strip mall. It was a Christian Reformed guy, and then a German guy who wasn't a Christian bought it, and I worked for him for a little while. But there's a deli just down the way, and I'd often work, quite a bit on Friday afternoons because I'd clean up and get everything clean for Saturday, and the baker would come in, and Saturday was a big day. Weekends were big days at this bakery. And the fish that they sold at the deli the fried fish was just amazing. It's like, why is Friday such an important fish day? And frankly, I'd far rather have that fish than a hamburger. So
Years, meals, and then a normal meal every day of Lent.
Okay.
Friday, of course, meatless all day.
Yeah.
And I did that for 2 years.
Well, because you time into it at a certain age point, right? Yeah.
Right. And then all of a sudden, you don't have to fast anymore.
When? What do you mean?
When I was 22, that was the last year I fasted
For the Lent.
for Lent. Yeah, that was the last year. And they all said, well, you could do it on your own.
Right, which is also saying like you don't really have to do it. So therefore, practically speaking, nobody
But no,
can.
we still had.
now this is a huge change, especially in a child or a young person. This is a huge change in their religious imaginary. Because when you're a child and you grow up into this is how the world works. Remember what religion is. Religion is that which determines that which is highest and how to achieve it. That's what religion is. And so a change like this is astounding. Watching what's happening with Jesus and his disciples come to Jesus and said, hey, look, we've got our fasting and feasting stuff going on here in our resistance to Rome and Hellenism and all of these things happening. Why aren't your disciples fasting? And he says, well, the bridegroom is here. Why would they fast when I'm here? Okay. And so then he goes away and they're in terror, and then he comes back and they're in celebration, but then he ascends. And so then you have the question, because obviously he's at the right hand of God the Father and he's reigning over heaven and earth. And so surely I will be with you to the end of the age. So, and I think you're exactly right that the church over a long period of time, in order to try to embody the tensions in this story, said what we're going to do is have a communal pattern of fasting and feasting. That's right. So that our people understand both modalities.
Yes. Because that's the DNA of existence. God became man so man can become God. This is the partnership. This is how it looks, seed and soil, right? Man and woman. It's just, that's how it looks. There's a partnership of sort of a dying to something so that you can live. And so that's it. That's just the DNA of existence. It's just how things work. And the church has to embody those things. And for me, that was it. Can I... I'm going to tell you a personal story. It's pretty personal, but do you mind? It's good though.
I don't mind.
Okay.
You're the one telling the personal story.
I'm the one. What am I talking about?
You've got the skin in the game. I'm here for it.
What am I talking about? I've told this on my pod, but I just want to share it with you, just like, because you're my friend. This is happening. So when I first became Orthodox, it was 30 years ago, and I met right after that, I met my wife, but we didn't date. Long story short, I pined for her, and I even left and went overseas, and I came back and I've actually got married to her. She's a New Yorker, uptown, from born and raised in Harlem in the Bronx. And so this is it's a love story. I love this woman to death to this day. But within the first year and a half, we got pregnant. She got pregnant with our first. I have 4 daughters. But this was our first together. She had two daughters. So long story short, here comes the baby. And at that point, I was my spiritual father was in Rokor, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. They tend to be traditional, and so I still am. I still go to Rokor Parish. I'm indebted to that flavor of American Orthodoxy. So she's pregnant, and as you know, and everybody knows, when you're pregnant, things slow down in terms of your romantic life, and so they're slowing down. Let's just say to not even a crawl. Let's just say they're turned off.
The season of fasting.
It's fasting. It's baby imposed fasting, and so the thing is my daughter at the time is going to be due. And I see it coming because I'm a young guy and I'm enamored with my wife, like really enamored. And she's about to give birth. Wait a minute, in January, that's fine. But I'm doing all the math and I'm realizing then there's going to be a 6-week time after that. As people know, you're not exactly rekindling during that 6-week time. And there's a little baby. That's all dead news. And then I'm looking at the calendar and then the 52 days of fasting begins with before Pascha, before Easter.
Lent is coming.
Lent, yes, Lent. And I'm looking at it going, oh no.
It's gonna be a great Easter that year, baby. Great.
Well,
Easter.
you already anticipated it. I went to my spiritual father and I said, Father, look, here's the situation. I just explained this. And he looks at me straight and he's like, so what are you asking me? And I said, well, economy is a word, it's like, well, life is hard and also you're being crushed under the weight of the sins of the world. And so I understand that this happens to you. So maybe go have romance sex with your wife. But he just looked at me and went, well, I don't get what you're asking. And I said, well, I want to have relations with my wife during the fast. And he's like, so have relations with your wife. I don't get it. What's the problem? And I said, well, because of the fast, I don't want to break the fast. He goes, well, then don't break the fast. And so I'm going, okay, but I want to have relations. He says, are you asking me for a blessing?
He's looking for a dispensation.
Yeah. He says, I don't listen. I don't know who taught you Orthodoxy. I'm like 2 years into it. He said, you have to live with that. You're the one who's sitting in the bed, not me. So here's the deal. You don't get a blessing. And I told my wife, that's what he said. You think we had any relations? No. And so what happened for the next 8 weeks or whatever is I prepared for Pascha. And then just what you said, Paul, that was a true embodied understanding of the resurrection in the truest sense. And it stuck with me all these years that I had to live within the tension. And I decided, well, my wife decided, and in part, both of us decided that we'd try out what the church is teaching. And then I realized, bam, it has deep, profound meaning beyond just the words. That's my way of saying that there has to be that structure that is time tested, and that when you don't like it, you don't get to start your own church. It just doesn't work like that. You can, but you're going to miss out on the fruits of the fast of the darkness. And so I don't know. That taught me a ton. That taught me more than all these good sermons he was preaching. Believe me, that taught me a lot.
I believe it.
There's some tension, there's some ability to live within the paradox. And I think Christians have lost a lot of that ability to say, yeah, guess what? I sinned and also I'm forgiven and also it sucks. And also I'll probably do it again. And also God is good and I just keep going and none of it makes that much sense. That's what I found that Orthodoxy allows me to do somehow. So,
well, I think, and I love your story. And I think part of when I listen to that story, what I hear from that story, part of the transition that happened into the modern world was in the pre-modern world, institutions, the church had made a certain peace with the givenness of the fasting and feasting that come in this dispensation. That this is whether we're living in the years of the fat cows or the lean cows, blessed be the name of the Lord. And whether the Lord brings me into a life or a season of fasting, or if he in his great generosity gives me a season of feasting, blessed be the name of the Lord. And what you are is in many ways comfortable with the givenness of your lot and the givenness of your life. And for and I think part of what has changed is we are in a culture of, to use Paul King's North, of the machine that says there's no there to anybody who is waiting for blessing is a fool, and anyone who fasts in anticipation of celebration is a fool. If you want if you want good things in the world, you have to take it and make it yourself, which is, of course, in many ways the spirit that motivates our father and mother to take the fruit of the tree and not hold from it. And I don't remember where I saw it, but I saw a video, and then it was sort of underneath. Somebody had made another video, and Peugeot was talking. They had Peugeot talking on it, and Peugeot was explaining how basically he was making the same point as James K. Smith, the professor of philosophy at Calvin University, where he makes these points in his books on the kingdom, where everything that you do is a ritual in life. Your life is full of ritual and liturgy, and this formation of this, really a formation of a culture that Catholicism, medieval Catholicism, had just generation after generation after generation. You observe the fast, you don't eat, this is a mortal sin. Don't do that. If you do that thing, you're in danger of hell. So you'd better be very careful about what you do and when you do it.
And the Friday abstaining from meat
was pretty like rock solid.
Paying a mortal sin.
Right.
Okay. So that went from you had to eat no meat on Friday to you could substitute a pious practice,
I'd say,
for that. So basically what happened is the Friday abstinence went completely out of the window, except for the Fridays of Lent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, and what's so interesting with this Orthodox moment, you can see where the Catholics have sort of given up. Well, we Orthodox, we're really going to do this. We're going to be serious about this. But are they? I don't know. I got this great story from John Heers, and maybe I'll just drop it right in here. And, I'm not criticizing him at all, but there's this tension between liberation and rigor. And it's an important tension because you want to be careful about legalism, but you also don't want to totally undermine your rigor. So when I listen to these stories, and she continues to tell stories, it's just fascinating to me.
You invoke mortal sin.
Right.
Now, as a post-conciliar child, that would have been a pretty hazy detail for me. I mean, now, of course, I know because I've done my studies and et cetera, the difference between a venial sin and a mortal sin. But that was very much part of your formation. You had that sensibility of a mortal sin. Now, again, for our audience here, what does it mean to be in a state of mortal sin?
To be in a state of mortal sin means that if you die, you go to hell.
Okay. And so therefore, how do you repair that state?
You go to confession.
Okay.
So confession lines were always
running.
Always running. And for an important feast like Christmas or Easter, because you had to do your Easter duty. You had to go at least once a year.
Right. To consume. You actually had to.
Right.
And that was in the Easter season. But anyway.
But most people were trying to do it before Easter, and that all completely
went away.
Yeah.
And how was that conveyed to you? I mean, like what is the messaging structure? Like, now we would just go on Facebook and they would tell us this or something, but like, how was that conveyed to you?
The whole concept of mortal sin kind of I wouldn't say it was changed, but it was suppressed.
Downgraded.
Yeah, it was.
in terms of
it was downgraded. Yeah, it just it was like, in order to commit a mortal sin, you would just have to be, you would basically cursing God.
Yeah.
But anything up to that wasn't really mortal sin. And even there was another significant thing that occurred shortly after Vatican II, I think, because it was Paul VI that did it.
Because remember, Paul VI comes in, I believe, in the second year of the council. John dies after the first session.
And Paul VI
right.
finishes it.
Okay.
Removing, when you married outside of the church, you married you were a divorced person, or you were marrying a divorced person.
But you got civilly married. Or...
Right. You were not only in a state of mortal sin, you were excommunicated.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was removed.
Okay.
Now, you were still in a state of mortal sin.
Right.
But you were not excommunicated.
Okay.
And it was downgraded. It had a tremendous effect. And annulments, the annulment process was put into every diocese. And basically, in order for you to get an annulment before this time, you had to go to Rome. It was a 5-year process. And a lot of them very
denied.
Right.
Yeah.
But and some people did go through the process, and it was wonderful that they were able to get into, back into the state of grace.
Yeah.
But the annulment process was put into every diocese. Right. So it did make it easier to do. And of course, look, I have your brother and my son, went through the annulment process, and I'm glad that it's there.
Yeah, of course.
But the easier something is to do, the more of it you're going to have.
Sure.
Yeah.
It maybe invites it on some level.
Right.
That's a practical reality, I suppose, of the situation. Okay, so just curious. I mean, you went to school with all Catholics, or mostly Catholics, right? Now we'll get into you marry a non-Catholic in 1968.
Again, the key, they're in this community. If you want to shape someone's thoughts, have them embedded with everyone who thinks the same way. That's how your worldview, in many ways, is constructed.
After the council, but that's sort of a different question right now. But I mean, what kind of conversations were you having with your fellow friends about all this stuff?
Well, of course, I was in a Catholic school surrounded by Catholics. And so we had lots of conversations about what was going on. I was a person that tended to, if the church taught it, I accepted it. And I believed in it. That didn't mean I couldn't investigate and kind of give knowledge to why I believed something. But there were a lot of people beginning to pick it apart and question, and even teachers.
Okay, go ahead.
We're beginning to, that. And I could definitely see, I was born in 1944. I'm right on the cusp between the baby boomers
and the silent
and the traditional generation, the silent generation, the World War II generation.
GI generation.
Right, because I was born in the middle of World War II.
Yeah, you're a war baby. You and Dad are war babies.
Yeah. And which sort of unusual. But I'm trying to decide where I was going with this.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, I was asking you about your conversations you were having with friends.
Okay.
And...
So they were willing to. Okay. Oh, I know what I wanted to say, because this is important.
Yeah.
I can literally look behind me, the kids coming up 2 years after me, and seeing a sea change. That was the bell bottoms, the long straight
hair,
the hippie movement. I went from being in college where you didn't wear shorts on the college campus. Girls did not wear shorts on the college campus, to anything goes. You could wear anything you want.
Jeans,
it was
shorts.
A sea change, in a 2-year span.
So you're literally a senior then in 1965, looking at the freshmen and sophomore, being like, who are they? Like, what's going on?
What's going on? And even
there's a YouTube channel. I forget the guy's name. Byrne is the one who pointed me to him. This guy has a lot of videos from the 60s and 70s. And one of the things he emphasizes is that, of course, this is not uniform, but it did go fast. And I just look at pictures of I was born in 63, and you can just, I mean, things changed fast. And so often when you get a fast change like this, what's communicated is, doesn't matter. This is okay, that is okay, anything goes.
Teachers began to be much more liberal.
Interesting.
Yes.
It's just in terms of affect and dress and approach.
And what?
Now, I suspect that some of you out there on Team Rigor are going to say, yeah, this is when it all went wrong. They should have held the line. They should have made sure that these things didn't change. Perhaps. There are plenty of communities out there that do hold lines, and the community just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. They might look at the Amish, hey, the Amish are still there. Well, fair enough. They do hold a line. I was talking to someone recently who was talking to me about the Mennonite Church and the Amish, and how on one level they're nonviolent in terms of government, but sometimes they don't think a lot about beating their kids or beating their wives. And that just surprised me when this person said that. And is it true? I don't know. But it was like, it's sort of the inverse. I mean, I grew up, the households my parents grew up in, the household I grew up in, the thought of domestic violence in those households are just inconceivable, unimaginable. None of my grandfathers or my father would ever raise a hand to their wives or their children. Well, I did get spanking, so you define your violence that way. But always on the posterior, never any place else. Never, ever, ever, ever. But serve in the army, that's what you do. And so, I mean, Cale is really onto something. These changes are foundational, and in many ways, there's an entire cosmos within which people grew up, and that was simply how they were formed. That's how they saw the world. And when that changed, you're going to have dislocation. People are going to act in different ways.
What they were actually
intellectually.
teaching.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Because you see, everything was being questioned. Everything was kind of, you had these small changes. What else was up for grabs?
Right. So you can almost kind of see where, with these sort of little changes kind of on the periphery, the essentials are still essentials, but it starts to sort of have an encroachment on what we may call the majors. You could talk about the minor stuff, but now it has a way
into deeper and deeper stuff.
Like we might say core stuff.
Yeah, and especially moral theology.
Okay, yeah. Okay, maybe we can go back to the moral theology in a minute.
So again, back to this.
And the bomb, the realities on the battlefields of Europe were now clear. We were clearly going to win the war. And he formed this committee at Harvard in the fall of 1943 to think about, like, how do we reconstruct our civilization? So in this report, the faculty members of the report, they wanted to balance the authority of the Western tradition, the canon, the Western canon, but they wanted to open it up to greater freedom for students to ask critical questions. So they were trying to balance, if you will, the authority of our tradition with this new emphasis on openness. But all of the prestige went to openness. And so over time, this erodes the balance. Or you can even think of Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s book from 1949 called The Vital Center. And the vital center is his recognition that in a modern technological capitalist society that you have all this dynamism and change, and it needs to be balanced in the vital center. To create a vital center, it needs to be balanced by security and a sense of belonging. And I think that those, like I say, I think I probably would have agreed with that. In fact, I went back and reread The Vital Center recently. It's a marvelous book of political propaganda. He was very good. And it's a smart book. And that balance.
Now, so then when you see that and you go back to, what's happening here.
We're willing to, okay, oh, I know what I wanted to say, because this is important.
Yeah.
I can literally look behind me, the kids coming up 2 years after me, and seeing a sea change. That was the bell bottoms, the long straight
hair, yeah.
The hippie movement. I went from being in college where you didn't wear shorts on the college campus. Girls did not wear shorts on the college campus, to anything goes. You could wear anything you want.
Jeans,
it was
shorts.
A sea change, yeah, in a 2-year span.
So you're literally a senior then in 1965, looking at the freshmen and sophomore, being like, who are they? Like, what's going on?
What's going on? And even
Now again, you might be Team Rigger. Just do some Googling about what happened in Iran in their Islamic Revolution. Before the Islamic Revolution, you've got women, they're wearing Western modern dress, they're wearing this, and then pretty soon everything goes down. I mean, it's not just Christianity that is dealing with this. Obviously, there are questions about globalization. Everybody's got to deal with this. And when, let's say, some others point to the fact that, hey, everybody's trying to get to the West from these countries of repression. Again, I've made this point before. I see a lot of people out there on Team Rigger, and part of me is just a little bit skeptical, because it's like, well, I want Rigger whose product I understand. And by product I understand means that there's no rigor unless I embrace it myself willingly. Again, it's still an optional thing. It's not you're raised as a child and you will fast and you will observe the Lenten fast and you will do this. I mean, I grew up, I never rebelled, but we would go to the second service on Sunday night. We wouldn't watch TV on Sunday afternoons. As a kid, I never thought to try my parents by turning on the television on a Sunday afternoon. That was just too terrifying. There were things I would go over to my, after church, sometimes I'd go to my friend's place and they would watch TV on Sunday. That was kind of nice because there's different programs on ABC. Wide World of Sports was on, and they had like World's Strongest Man competition, and that was pretty cool. And if the Olympics were on, you could watch the Olympics on Sunday afternoon. But TV in the Vanderklay house ain't going on till I get back from college, and that's when my parents slid, and I didn't deconstruct, but I mean, this stuff is real stuff, especially for kids and youth.
The teachers began to be much more liberal.
Interesting.
Yes.
It's just in terms of affect and dress and approach.
And what they were actually
intellectually.
teaching.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Because you see, everything was being questioned. Everything was kind of, you had these small changes. What else was up for grabs?
Right. So you can almost kind of see where, with these sort of little changes kind of on the periphery, the essentials are still essentials, but it starts to sort of have an encroachment on we may call the majors. You could talk about the minor stuff, but now it has a way
into deeper and deeper stuff.
Like we might say core stuff.
Yeah, and especially moral theology.
Okay, yeah. Okay, maybe we can go back to the moral theology in a minute. So, look, you're a Catholic young woman, and certainly at the time, the expectation is automatic, of course, that a vast majority of young men and women get married sometime, either probably at the end of college or right after college, right?
Or sometimes in the middle.
I'm saying sometimes in the middle of college. You have friends who were married in the middle.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
And of course, I mean, sex drive is pretty strong. That gets people married. It really does.
Some finished college, some didn't.
I see.
I was able to finish college.
Yeah.
And then get married. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, look, hovering over all of this conversation is contraception.
Yes. Oh, it was a huge issue.
So,
and this was this is what was really being chipped away.
Right. So what's fascinating to me about this is that nowhere in the documents of the Second Vatican Council is there even any mention of family planning or contraception.
Right.
And yet, in terms of like, it's almost like extra conciliar chatter is about this, which makes total sense. You're a young person, you're looking to get married. This is an issue that cuts right at the core of your understanding of yourself as a young Catholic person,
Right.
to get
And
married.
you see, the pill had just gained steam, and the church even, they formed a commission to study it. What could you use the pill morally?
Right. So that now the church doesn't officially make a pronouncement
Right.
until 68. Right. But prior to that, so I want to, so what is that like? I mean, you're a young intellectual, college student in this time.
Right. Well,
So I've got the link to this below. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I mean, she gets on the pill. She marries a non-Catholic man. He eventually will convert to Catholicism. He has to agree to raise the kids Catholic. But you can see the change is happening.
We go to school, Catholic schools, and you probably didn't think too much in terms of our catechism because you just
I
assumed...
didn't worry about it at all. Not at all until the fateful day when you showed me the book.
Yeah. Okay. So we moved from New Orleans to Baton Rouge when I'm in 5th grade.
Yes.
And so when we changed schools, obviously we went to the Catholic school, and then we go on to Catholic High, and at some point though you become a religion teacher.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Remember at MBS. Yeah.
So what was your experience of that? So now all of a sudden, now you're like a teacher. You're dealing with DREs. You're dealing with pastors. What is that
and
like?
I'm beginning to pick up the incredible liberality of, and I'm not an old phobic.
No, not at all.
No. But I begin to see the incredible liberality of what's going on, specifically in the what would you call it, the professional class.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
I mean, I was shocked. I remember.
Like what kind of stuff? You give the audience.
There was a class that I had to take from the diocesan level on human sexuality. If you were going to have anything to do with students, you had to take this class.
Got it. Okay.
So I go to the class, and I'm being told that homosexuality is like having blue eyes, which means it's a less dominant gene, but it's naturally occurring.
Therefore.
Right. And so that was the first thing I objected to.
You're like, hold on a second. I know the Bible pretty well here.
Right.
This seems to be a break from the tradition.
Now, part of what I skipped over, and again, watch the whole thing. It's an incredible video. She, it's her faith. She eventually gets involved in the Catholic Charismatic Renewal and really learns her Bible. And this, I'm going to maybe point to the conversation that Cale and Hank and Sam had, and I'll put the link to that below too. What's interesting is that, again, there's just sort of this subtle undercurrent of Protestantization. It's the laity that in some ways are reforming the hierarchy and demanding reforms in the hierarchy. Yeah, there's some leaders up there who a lot of the laity are pointing to. But when you look at, let's say, what I've seen in terms of complaining about the church and standing up to the church and demanding reform of the church and cheering for certain papal candidates and not others, and to me, I look at it, it's like, seems like the laity in action. And so there's this sense in which certain elements of the Protestant Reformation just continue to move. Now, it doesn't mean that all elements of the Protestant Reformation continue to move, but some of these things just get into the culture. It has to be voluntary. You do you, let us alone to do us. I mean, even the Benedict option is in that sense libertarian, because you have these small communities of agreement. And if you don't agree, you don't have to be in it. That's a world different from, I'm not just saying only Catholics ran this, from, let's say, read stories of Protestant, Puritan, Pilgrim New England, where they're struggling mightily trying to get everybody to go to church every week. I mean, part of the Protestant Reformation was, if you read Charles Taylor, before you had this two-speed religion, well, you know, you have the monks and the priests, and they're supposed to be up there, and they're supposed to be what we all look to, and maybe I'm weak and not up to it, and I'll support them, I'll send them money, I should aspire to be them, but they're the saints, they're our ideals. And you get this inversion where it's the problems with the leaders, and so it's the laity that have to rise up.
At the very least.
I don't believe in being ugly to people,
Yeah, no.
mean or anything like that. But this is 2,000 years of and before of church teaching. But anyway, and then she, this is when I really lost it. She's talking about IVF.
Wow.
And she says, she quotes the father of the first IVF child, which was Louise. I think her name was Louise Brown, but it was baby Louise. She had been conceived this way, and I think he was a minister. The dad was a minister, and he said, "I know, IVF is possibly wrong, but he said, but when I see my daughter, I just can't believe she's wrong." Well, of course,
there's nothing wrong with the baby.
The baby, right. A child conceived out of wedlock is everybody else's, sin, not the baby's sin. But anyway, so I raised my hand, and said, I said, I came to this class to find out what the church teaches. And she says, well, this is a graduate level class, and I have to think for myself. And I said, and it just popped out of my mouth. I said, I didn't come here to hear what you thought. Oh. I came here to hear what the church teaches. Yeah. Well, you could have heard a pin drop in the class. I was clearly the skunk at the at the garden party.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Oh, we have a live one here. They're hitting the panic button. Right. Oh no, we've got an old. But again, I think that would have been true. It's like, oh, Judy, she's like a pre-Vatican II
Catholic. Yes. But that was when I began to realize, and I said, these are the people that are going to be going into all the Catholic schools in the diocese and teaching. Yeah. And they're not going to be teaching Catholic doctrine. Yeah. They're anyway.
Yeah. So okay. So now that
was in the 80s.
Yeah, that heady time again from 1970 to 1980, it's crazy time. Again, from my perspective, this is sort of crazy time. So John Paul II gets elected in 1978.
Yes.
Now, one of my early memories is I'm sitting in the living room and you're watching the.
Okay, so watch the whole video. It's a great video. This was another great video. I love this conversation. Now, Hank went from being evangelical to Roman Catholic, and if you see me leaving comments trolling Hank, we troll each other. We do so quite regularly on Twitter. You can find it. Hank and I are fine together. We really are. And all are involved in the Midwestuary that we're putting together. Part of what's so interesting, too, is that, Hank is often like, I'm doing this and it's all stuff from the Bible. I'm going to these Catholic churches and it's all stuff from the Bible. And it's like, I know you're going to, you would try to dunk on Sola Scriptura given the minute you say something, but you sure do love the Bible. And I love this moment where Sam just sort of, because you almost get this sense of, we got to turn the clock back. I'm not saying any of these people are saying that, okay? But that's sort of where the mind goes. We got to if only we could go back. But, in some ways, that's sort of what gets Pius the 11th into trouble. And there's no going back, but you want to deal with what's back. And
I mean, ultimately.
And by the way, hey, here's something that you Protestants should know. We do have bad bishops, and we have really good bishops. Okay? It's called the human condition.
all right, but the idea, again, I get all this stuff, apostolic succession, and this is how the tradition is supposed to be maintained, and this is how we're going to do it. And it's like, I don't know that your laying on of hands is necessarily producing the results that everyone intends.
And so what you're seeing is, it was funny, Aaron Wren and I went back. I said, Wheaton College is a great mission field for the Catholic Church. It really is.
Yeah.
I was talking
how the turntables. Yeah.
What?
how the turntables.
Well, one of the things that we should always be doing with our young people is not trying to deconstruct them. Okay? Young people, and when I was young, it's easy to be deconstructed. Okay?
And again, back to Kale's conversation with her mother, you have all of this formation. In a sense, you better keep this. And this is where pluralism gets difficult, because now we're fasting and and we understand this whole system of mortal sin, and we've got all of this, and these people over there ain't doing it. And especially as a kid, where you're just sort of beginning to internalize the rigor involuntarily, it's like, I want to go over there and be them. They get to eat whatever they want. They get to do whatever they want with their girlfriend or their boyfriend. And they, and again, I mean, all this civilizational religion, why do people want to come to America? A lot of people want to come to America. Part of it is because of the affluence. Part of it is because of the security. But part of it is the freedom.
It's easy.
Totally.
And so the whole idea is that we should be lovingly constructing our young people. Okay? And Wheaton College is actively deconstructing its people.
And I agree with Hank to a degree with here, because I've seen the same thing at Calvin. Because, again, it's this, well, we've got to give them critical thinking, but we don't want to give them so much critical thinking that they criticize the formation, and so you'd better give them the tools. And so, and you see this all the time. Now, I'm not saying they're intending to deconstruct, but I was having a conversation with a colleague. I've spoken in CRC videos about the circulatory system. Well, many of the people that have come out of that I see coming through the pipeline, they're half deconstructed already. They're sort of in this emergent place, and it's like, I don't know what I believe, and it's like, fair enough. Well, let me engage you. And again, I'm neck deep in the TLC, where we are open and we do critical thinking and we do challenge each other. It's not that I'm against openness. I'm about as open as a CRC pastor can be and still be in the denomination. I love conversation. I love dialogue. I think the church needs to figure out how to continue to do this. But what we're struggling with is we're going to have to figure out what we form people into and how this works, and especially now with the pluralism. I mean, that's sort of what the TLC is about. We are figuring this out together, and now we're doing it not just in little groups of Christian Reformed people, although the Christian Reformed Church is not sort of this monolithic environment that it used to be, that I could at least taste. My parents tasted more. Now, diversity, and it's like, and again, I'm not against racial diversity. The two elders of my church, one is an African American man and one is a woman. Those are the two overseers overseeing me. Okay, so I know people watch these videos, think, well, Paul's so conservative. No, but these issues have to be figured out and worked with.
Either they deconstruct out of the faith, or they say, is there something else?
Right. And,
And they,
and in that sense, Hank, that was my trajectory, right? So having grown up fully in the post Vatican II spirit of Vatican II Church, right? A fundamentally iconoclastic movement in the guise of ad fontes, right? And I'm using those words on purpose because it's a sort of it's a magic.
And if you go to Dort and you look at what the Journal of Dort is, ad fontes. This is a Protestant battle cry in the Reformation era against the Catholics. Back to the sources, Erasmus, Luther.
Magisterial protest in a real way. I left the church, when I was 16 years old. I said, this is a load of hooey. It makes no sense. This sort of hyper horizontal thing where there's no such thing as the supernatural, really. And I really just have to, do service projects and all this sort of stuff. And I just realized, that, well, if what you're saying is true, then I'll just go do those things and sleep in on Sundays because there's no other reason for it to be. So I did that. And then I started to read, and I started to realize that there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and that what I had lived through was a kind of massacre that I didn't see then as a massacre. But in the process of reading Augustine, Plato and Aristotle, but, and Dante and these other things, I'm like, oh, wait, there's a whole patrimony that I was taught was done. It was old. It was gone. But I realized that there was a whole repository of wisdom and tradition that had been kept from me. And so what happened to me is that in that process, I became, again, and using our words today, I became much more traditional in my bent and my orientation. And so therefore, when I see somebody like John Paul II and Benedict XVI, I'm like, oh, they're trying to sort of bridge us to this vast reservoir of good that I had been cut off from. And so I became much more traditional. It was very clear in 1992 when I kind of read my way back into the church as a college freshman that the future of the church was not folk mass, 60s Catholicism, 70s Catholicism, but the future of the church was a sort of a return. Again, I know I made fun of that earlier, but the future of the church is ultimately mystical, it's vertical, and it's strange. And mystical, vertical, and strange were all things that I was groomed against growing up in the Catholic Church that I grew up in. And I realized that that wasn't an accident, that was actually something that was done on purpose.
So here's a question that I have for both of you. I'm, getting the vision of this, more conservative or orthodox or traditional movement among the young people. And I am familiar with that online. Mm-hmm. But in the Catholics that I know in real life that are my age,
do you know some?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, I mean,
I'm related to.
Fascinating.
I'm related to a couple dozen of them, my cousins and second cousins and whatever. Some of them are so Catholic, some of them aren't, but also just a lot of real life friends and stuff like that. Yeah. I know a lot of people.
Now, again, the link to this is below. And Sam mentions his great aunt, his grandmother's sister, who became a nun. And when she died, she didn't have many possessions. They found the wedding pictures of her marrying Jesus. And you watch that, was it Mrs. Davis? You watch that show, which was, first Bishop Barron is like lauding it. Like, oh, this is interesting. I watch it. It's like, this is sacrilegious enough to even make a Protestant squirm. And, it's just odd. So Sam's Catholic roots are deep.
Who seem very Vatican II-ish in the sense that there's a scale of how devout they are. but they think of themselves as Catholic. They're not anything but Catholic, obviously. They're suspicious that I probably go to cults. Because, Protestants, well, it's probably a cult. But they, went to college. They have moderately progressive views on social issues. They kind of feel uncomfortable that the church isn't aligned with their politics.
Correct.
But yet they still might send their kids to Catholic school or be relatively involved, have the church be relatively involved with that. And there's this sort of, uncomfortable dance between who has authority over different views in their lives. But, they mostly just want to be kind of a left-leaning, college-educated suburban family. American.
Yeah.
But the Catholic Church is their birthright. And those people, all of them that I know, really liked Francis.
Of course.
They felt like
huge.
Francis was, whether this was true or not, that Francis was, moving things, or at least a sign that things could move in the direction that they kind of wanted. And I know way more Catholics like that from real life that are outside this little corner.
Or you're on the North Shore.
Yeah.
Well,
I want to talk to that if you don't mind.
Go for it.
So you live in Chicago, you live in the North Shore. So so the whole idea of a kind of cultural Catholicism is a real thing. Okay. And I'm going to, for the purposes of this conversation, I will say that that's a problem. Like, I don't have a problem with cultural Christianity. Like, I'm sort of basically pro that. But the real tell then, Sam, so for me, amongst my cohort, those who understood it as a kind of default don't have Catholic kids.
Mm-hmm.
And those that understood Catholicism as a kind of living sign of contradiction have Catholic kids, right? So to me,
Okay, that's, I think, true. And I see Christian Reform analogies to that. But it gets into this weird space because, of course, Kale's mom grows up, it's a default. That's the formation of her world. Now, you have this other group that's sort of not anywhere near as observant, but growing up in another generation where they go to church every Sunday, they don't fast, they don't do this. One of the things that I've noted often is that the Christian Reformed Church has this doctrinal platform that says basically, salvation is of the Lord. And yet the Christian Reformed Church set up institutions to make sure their kids were saved. These interesting contradictions in here in terms of many of the people that grew up in that rigid Catholicism. And what's so funny is that so often when I listen to new atheists, so many of them just sort of imagine that that's still the way it goes because you've got ex-evangelicals who are coming out of, purity rings or very severe homeschooling environments. I homeschooled my kids. Okay, I did. And they're like, I'm getting out of there. But it's so complex and it goes all the way down.
Tell is always in terms of the transfer, right?
But I'm talking about millennials, people my age, more or less. And some of them have kids or not. Who knows what will happen? Their kids are like, under the age of 5 at the moment.
Right.
But,
well, to Paul's point, right? Do you let your kids have Netflix, right? And I love that as a kind of, meme or something. It's what is ultimately forming you. So for me, in growing up in this scrambled mess, I cared way more about my monthly scriptures being mailed to me in the form of Rolling Stone magazine than I did about anything having to do with like actual church stuff. So if you would have like done a dissection, an analysis of what was making Kale in 1989, it was not my watered down religion class at school. It was Rolling Stone. It was progressive politics. It was these kinds of influences. So so then, at some point, everyone is going to have to confront this. Like, what am I really? Yeah, fine. I'm a cultural Catholic. Like, I know what baptism is. I know what the Mass is, sort of. But ultimately, what's the primary influence on my life? And I wonder, when you live in this sort of ambient world of Catholicism, because I had a version of that in Louisiana growing up too. How much is that actually propositional, and how much of that actually is lived out in a practice? And I would argue probably very little. Maybe I'm wrong. Right.
Well,
So
I think
future,
it's more lived out in their practices than
Okay,
their propositions. Is sort of why I'm saying they go to church on Sunday often.
Okay.
They want their kids to be baptized and do the first communions and all that sort of stuff. They really like that the life stage milestone ceremonies
Yes, of
that
course.
Catholicism is good at. And of course they're going to their grandparents' funerals and those sorts of things. And so I feel like they're propositionally they're not particularly Catholic, but it is culturally, procedurally, and contextually they're Catholic, but they don't want to give it a certain hold on what they think in politics and sexual values. Although even though the way that they actually live their lives, at least once they're married, is pretty conservative. Maybe that in college, we don't look too closely at what they did during their 20s, but even that, it was probably just they had 3 or 5 relationships that were not right. But whatever,
and I don't want to trash that. I don't want to come across as trashing that.
And my question is like, I see what you guys are saying in that the future seems traditional, the future seems conservative, that the priests that are coming up are they really mean it, and that it is that there's this kind of brewing thing, especially perhaps even younger than the age of 30, that will take some time to play out. But I see a future clash of that with the millennials that I know that are sort of like, I'm a mildly progressive suburban American first, but this Catholic thing is really important to me.
Well, we're seeing it at our diocese, right? The Bishop Hicks is talking about.
Well, and this is exactly the confrontation you saw in the Christian Reformed Church. It's exactly the confrontation that we saw.
Then Herb, and then Matt from Lake Erie.
Rita Klein-Gelting, Classes Quinty. I have a question for the majority committee, and I think I know the answer. Actually, 4 questions, but I know the answer, but because otherwise I wouldn't have signed the minority report. If this passes, can someone who is unsure of what God expects of LGBTQ peoples, can that unsure person become a member of the CRC? Question 2, can someone who is unsure become an office bearer in the Christian Reformed Church, in our churches? Number 3, can someone who is unsure sign a gravamen? Is that okay? I've been a member of the Christian Reformed Church all my life, as my husband and our parents and my 4 sons. My 4 boys, who are, Karen knows they're men, and their wives are all following Jesus and are members of the Christian Reformed Church. My 12 grandchildren are members of the Christian Reformed Church. If my 4 sons and their wives fall into this category of unsure, can the CRC still be their home? You may answer the question.
No, I know. No, Rita, that's fine. We were in committee together. I bless you. We worked together. I'll try and answer as best I can. maybe not so much in the technical manner of things.
Come to order, folks. Give some space here. Give some space.
At 5:30 this evening, we adjourned. I think it was 5:35, and I jumped in my vehicle and I drove to a sports bar down the street, had ice water with lemon. And here I am, a 55-year-old guy sitting in the corner in a sweater, crying. I love this church. I've been a member all my life. I love preaching for this church. I love teaching in this church. I love its confessions. I wouldn't be standing here tonight if I didn't love these confessions. But what griefs me so bad is that we make decisions here, and that we leave here, and some decide to be ogres about it, jerks about it, and we can't even hold to a confession. We gotta be jerks about it. Please, so Rita, I hear your heart. Yes, Willem, it is a yes and no question. No. Let me try and put it this way. And if I'm out of order, say so. If you're going to vote for this majority report, please don't leave here and be a jerk about it. And to those who are opposed to this report, not all of us hate LGBT people. Okay? Sorry. I'm sorry. So, yes, I want to believe, Rita, those who have questions, who are unsure, have a place, and we're not jerks about it, and we can find a way to converse. But please understand, I love these confessions, and we could do this. We could hold the truth and bring people along in the truth, and they can see Christ in us. I don't know, I realize that probably doesn't specifically answer your question. I'm just speaking to the heart of what we're trying to talk about here, so I apologize.
We have Matthew, then we have John.
So I'm glad we're talking about it, and I'm glad that Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, even people all across the religious, spiritual spectrum that we have here in the TLC, this is what we work on together. What comes out of it will be interesting, if anything comes out of it. But just again, the links to the videos are below.
Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Melt me, mold me, build me, use me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of Why should we tarry when Jesus is pleading for you and me? Why should we linger and heed not his mercies for you and me? Come home, you weary, come home, earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, oh sinner, come home. Last verse, oh for wonderful love he has promised for you and for me. Though we have sinned, he has mercy and pardon for you, pardon for me. Come home, you weary, come home, earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, oh sinner, come home, oh sinner, come home, you don't have to roam, and Rome wasn't built in a day, I think it was built in 4 hours, because God is the record with the tower. Because he was like Speedy Smurf, like Papa Smurf, we're all in this turf, and we gotta get it going.
Only 4 hours.
One love. Yeah, boy.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Peugeot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.